protection on those who aren't here, Lord God. Father God, I pray an anointing on Brother Dave, Lord God, that teaches and leads us into the way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, for those of you joining us online, we've delayed it a few minutes because once again, it seems like Wednesdays are the big day for rain in the New Orleans area. So we're hoping it's going to slack up. We may have some more people joining it, but regardless, it'll be recorded on Facebook. I want to remind everybody too that you can download all of this material from originsresource.org, which is right there. Origins Resource Association is originsresource.org, and why is it not showing? What do I have to do? I don't know. I don't know how to deal with this stuff. Okay, now I'm back at Origins. There we are. Okay, originsresource.org. And if you click on the Bible College material links, that's where you'll see my whole Bible College class as well as this shortened version, which is the Bible Apologetics. So you go up to the English and you can right click there and say download. And for the PowerPoint, you can right click and download there. Well, it might be 119 slides by now. Forgive me. Okay, well, whenever our other person gets here, I did look up some things. Okay, one more time. Full screen. There we go. Well, you know what happens, guys. When you pay a lot, you get a lot. But y'all watching online, how much are you paying? I love doing this, but I don't have an engineer to do stuff for me, so you just got to take what you can get. Okay, getting closer, closer, closer. Last week we talked about how we could be sure the Bible is from God and not just from people. It's a matter of faith, but when you see the number of prophecies that have been fulfilled in the Bible, no human being can predict the future with 100% accuracy. Somebody might be able to take a guess occasionally, but not every time. And the Bible has hundreds of perfectly fulfilled prophecies. We went through a number of those last week, so you can watch the video of that. The question now is, has the Bible been accurately preserved? Some of you may have seen this idea before, that the Bible's been copied and recopied, translated and retranslated so many times that we can't be sure that what we have is what was originally written thousands of years ago. It's a really common belief because people don't understand the process whereby the Bible was copied. Remember, the New Testament is written in Greek, and it was a common Greek of the day. It's called Koine Greek, which was the business language. So everybody spoke Koine Greek. The Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew. There's a few little small parts that are written in Aramaic, mainly in the book of Daniel, but primarily Hebrew. So you can easily go out and take a course in biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek. I haven't done Hebrew, but Greek, it's really, once you learn the alphabet, even if you don't know the vocabulary, you can go out and get an analytical lexicon, and it'll tell you exactly what the word is intended to say. And so sometimes you pick up a few extra insights from reading the Greek text that don't quite come across in English. Well, Hebrew also, but I haven't learned Hebrew. So I do know a little Hebrew. He runs a deli down, R. Okay, so let's talk first about where the New Testament came from, what makes it up, and so forth. It was written in Koine Greek, the common business language of that day. And there are a great many churches and Bible colleges and so forth that offer classes in Koine Greek. So if you're interested, you could learn to read it yourself. Paul wrote approximately half the books in the New Testament. It's questionable whether he wrote Hebrews or not. So he wrote 13, maybe 14. It doesn't really matter, but of course, God didn't take his pen to paper and write things. There's only one instance where he wrote something, and we talked about that last Wednesday night. Well, no, 2 times. What are the 2 times where God the Father wrote something? Handwriting on the wall, yeah. Now, of course, there's another case where God wrote something.
The sand, and we don't know.
The Son of God reached down and wrote in the sand, right? Right. But anybody can verify the accuracy of the translation for yourself. Some of the other named authors in the New Testament are Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, James, and Jude. The first New Testament books, get another packet, Mercedes, get another packet because I made a lot of changes in it.
Oh,
The first New Testament books were written about 20 years after the resurrection. So 1 Corinthians, we believe, was written around 50 AD. All but John's writings were completed within the next 50 years. In fact, all but John's writings were completed before the destruction of Jerusalem, which was in 70 AD. His books are believed to have been, John's writings. All the rest of them were completed by the destruction of Jerusalem. John's writings are believed to have been written between 85 and 100 AD, and the last one, of course, is the book of Revelation. So the books, they didn't have printing presses back then, so the books were written by hand and sent to local churches. Well, it wasn't just that the church in Ephesus got one copy and that's it. No, they copied it and they passed it around. Copying was done by hand, of course, which is going to be the source of some of the textual variants that you see. But there's never any case of a variation of the meaning or the substance of any New Testament text, even if somebody misspelled a word or they transposed Christ Jesus versus Jesus Christ. It always means the same. So people have got this idea, we compare it to our books nowadays, that's written on a little flimsy piece of paper, and they say, 10, 20 years, that's going to fall apart. No, these things were written on papyrus or animal skins or scrolls. And these things could last hundreds of years. It was a woven fabric where you took the papyrus fibers and you made the sheet of papyrus and then you wrote on it. And so that papyrus would outlast the ink on it. So it could last several hundred years. And what would happen is when the ink was starting to fade, they would just re-letter it. So it's not like we have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. Beginning around the year 300 or so, this is when scrolls began to be compiled into books, which are called codices. The singular is codex. And some of these have survived to the present day. Codex Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Alexandrinus, they've survived to the present day, and they're the basis of the New Testament that we have. Scholars can go to various libraries around the world and look at them. Of course, Vaticanus is in the Vatican. But then one of the things that the British did that is beneficial for us, it was crummy on their part. The British always had the attitude, anything they saw, we like it, we'll take it, we like it, we'll take it, we like it, we'll take it. They spread around the world and they conquered all sorts of places, and there was a saying that the sun never set on the British Empire. Well, the British would go find something and say, oh, we like it, we'll take it. So they found tremendous numbers of ancient manuscripts, whether it's fragments or scrolls or at least some of the codices, and they brought them back to the United Kingdom. That's one of the things on my bucket list. I want to get to London, Edinburgh, and Dublin because some of the original manuscripts are in the libraries there. Now, you and I can't go handle them because they're in sealed up containers, and they're very fragile because they're 1900 and some years old. But the originals could last for centuries. So Paul wrote his letter to the Ephesians, and somebody in Ephesus said, let me copy these. And then let me copy these, and let me copy these. So while no one church had all of the books at the beginning, all of the churches collectively did have all of the New Testament books. So if you wrote down your original, your Paul, and you write down your original, and that's going to last 200-300 years. Well, somebody may come along 100, 150 years later and recopy it, and then somebody copies a codex, and they just copy what it said. So at worst, it was a copy of a copy. It wasn't a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. It's just a copy of a copy. And I wish that I could say that the copying was always done perfectly. Well, every now and then somebody would mess up a little bit. Pardon me a second. Okay. So those are some pictures of the three main codices. Codex Alexandrinus. You can see they look like books. This is when people began to bind things into books. Found in Alexandria, but the British took it and brought it to the British Library. And Sinaiticus is also kept in the British Library, and Vaticanus is, of course, kept in the Vatican. So these are almost complete New Testaments. Almost. There's a few little pieces that might be missing here and there. So how do we know that an ancient manuscript is reliable? Any ancient manuscript. Well, there are certain standard tests done. So let's apply the same thing to the New Testament as is done to the other ones. First thing we want to know is when was it written, the date of composition. And then what's the date of the oldest surviving copy? You'll hear a fancy word, extant, the date of the oldest extant copy, surviving copy. And then, well, how much time was it between when it was written versus the oldest surviving copy? And how many copies do we have? And how closely do the copies agree with each other? That's how we generally tell whether something is reliable, whether it's worthwhile. So these are some of the best preserved ancient books. Herodotus, who was a historian, he wrote between about 488 to 428 BC. And the earliest copy of Herodotus' writings dates to about 900. So there's a time lapse of about 1,300 years. But people generally accept it because there's 8 copies. Okay, we can compare and say they're pretty good. Thucydides wrote around the same time, from about 460 to 400, and his oldest surviving copy is also about 900, so there's a gap of about 1,300 years. 8 copies of Thucydides, so people accept it as reliable. Okay, and then Tacitus, the Roman historian, he wrote approximately 100 AD, and the oldest surviving copy is about 1100. So there's a 1,000-year gap. There's 20 copies, so we generally accept that as being authoritative. Then Caesar wrote a book called The Gallic War. That was written around 50 BC. The oldest surviving copy is about 900, so there's a 950-year gap. But we have 9 complete and 10 partial copies of that. So people say, yeah, okay, I'll trust that one. And then Livy also wrote Roman history. He wrote around the time of Christ, from 59 BC to 17 AD. And the oldest surviving copy dates to the year 900. So there's about a 900-year gap, but there's 20 copies of that. So people will accept what's written in Livy's Roman history. Okay, so the second best preserved ancient book is the Iliad by Homer, Greek guy. He wrote it about 700 BC, and the oldest complete copy dates to about 1300 AD, which is 2,000 years later. But there's a partial copy about 500 years after the original. About 5% of the text is uncertain. One manuscript disagrees with another, but there are 643 manuscripts available. So we say we're not going to worry about the 5% discrepancy. Yeah, we'll accept this as authoritative. That's the second best book. What do you think is the best? What's that?
They all the ones that he wrote. All these
Nope. Nope. The best is the New Testament.
Oh, wow.
The New Testament was completed by about 100 AD, and the oldest complete manuscript dates to about 300 AD. And you can download the PowerPoints.
I want that.
Oh, well, you can get it. Just go to my website and download the PowerPoints. It's right there in a PowerPoint format. And so the oldest complete manuscript dates about 200 years after the original was written. There's some fragments that we still have that date as close as 25 years after the time John wrote on a papyrus. That's called the John Rylands fragment of the Gospel according to John. So if you compare all of the New Testament manuscripts, we got a lot of them, there's at most about 0.5% uncertainty. That is 995 out of every 1,000 words are certain. Now I'm including in that where one manuscript says Christ Jesus and the other one says Jesus Christ. Well, I don't consider that an uncertainty or a discrepancy. So there's an agreement of 99.5%. And there are over 24,000 ancient manuscripts available. About 5,000 are in Greek, and the other ones are in Latin and other ancient languages. So we've got all of these manuscripts available, and the critics say, oh, no, you can't trust the New Testament. Well, then they ought to throw away every ancient book. These are some of the fragments that you can see in the libraries around the world. Papyrus 1, 2, 50, and so forth. And you can look these up. This name at the bottom, Aland, Kurt Aland is really recognized as an eminent biblical scholar. And you're going to hear his name again in a little bit. The Nestle Aland version of the New Testament. So this is one of the things I want to do. Get to the British Museum and the museum in Edinburgh and the museum in Dublin and actually look through the glass and see these myself. This is pictures other people took. I like using the pictures that I took. It's just so cool to say, I was there. Well, besides the biblical manuscripts, the Christian leaders of the first and second century, they quoted the New Testament. They were writing letters back and forth to each other. Over 1 million quotes. That's pretty significant. So we could reconstruct, even if we didn't have a single intact copy of the New Testament, we could reconstruct all but 11 verses of the New Testament just from the first and second century letters of the church leaders back and forth. So obviously, even though there might not have been any one church that had the whole New Testament at the beginning, the whole church did. Because these guys write over there and say, you know, Paul said blah, blah, blah. And these guys say, well, John said blah, blah, blah. He didn't actually say blah, blah, blah. You know, he said stuff in Greek, but I have a hard time with the pronunciation.
Stamada.
What is that?
Stamada.
What does that mean?
Stop.
Oh, okay. I tell you, there's one thing that I know in Greek. En arche en hologos, kai hologos en proston theon, kai theos en hologos. Beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And actually, it doesn't say, and the Word was God. It says, and God was the Word. It's even more emphatic in Greek than it is in English. So the whole church had the New Testament available, but then variant readings, oh no. There are some people that will say there's as many 200,000 variant readings in the New Testament. Well, what they mean is we've got 3 manuscript families. Suppose one of them has this reading and there's 2,000 copies. Another one has this reading and there's 2,000 copies. Instead of saying, well, there's one difference, they say there's 4,000 variant readings. It's very deceptive. There's not that many variant readings. There's not that many words in the New Testament. You couldn't have that many variants. So if you compare what's considered the best to the worst New Testament manuscript, there's less than 0.5% that's in any dispute. That is 995 out of 1,000 words are certain. So this is where I was kind of hoping that our other friend would be here today, because he talked about this. There are 3 main Greek New Testament manuscript families. One of them is called the Textus Receptus, or the received text. So we've got a whole bunch of different translations of the New Testament, or some that aren't really translations, they're paraphrases, like the Living Bible and the New Living Bible and so forth. Well, you can, when trying to translate from one language to another, you can go literal word for word. Or you can say, wait, I know this is an idiom, let me translate the idiom. For instance, if you ask somebody if they'd like a hot dog, well, in Spanish, you're not going to say perro caliente, which is a dog with elevated temperature. You know, it's an idiom. So, and I pointed this out in the Monday afternoon Bible class, there's a really cool idiom in Hebrew. We generally translate that Joshua slew them with the edge of the sword, but in Hebrew it says with the mouth of the sword. So it's like a devouring thing. But anyway, the translators generally render that as the edge of the sword because it's an idiom, and we understand what that means. So you can go with a literal word-for-word translation. You can try to convey the sense occasionally where idioms come up, Or you can just paraphrase. Well, I don't like the paraphrases like the Living Bible and so forth. That's where the author says, well, here's my opinion of what God meant. I like the ones that are, as strict as possible at translation. Actually, the Revised Standard Version is, I think, the closest to a word-for-word translation, although it doesn't always get the idea across. King James and New King James do a great job. Now, of course, they're based on a family of manuscripts called the Textus Receptus. A lot of people just say Receptus. It was used as the basis of the King James Version. Martin Luther's German translation also relies on it, the Reina Valera, which is one of the main Spanish versions, and several other important European translations. The Textus Receptus was compiled by a Dutch Catholic monk named Erasmus. At the time he was compiling this, in 1516, he began to compile it, and he was helped by others. So by the year 1600, the Textus Receptus was complete. Well, some people say now that we shouldn't use other translations because the Textus Receptus is the majority of the manuscripts. It's not. At the time that Erasmus was putting it together, it was the majority text, but there were not that many manuscripts discovered yet. Later on, we've discovered more and more and more, and now the majority text is significantly different from the Textus Receptus. I don't think that there's going to be any problem at all with God, though, if you go with a translation that says your versus a translation that says our, something like that. So when the Greek manuscripts were not available to Erasmus, for instance, the last 6 verses of Revelation, he was a Catholic priest. He went back to the Catholic translation, which was the Latin Vulgate. And so there is one discrepancy you'll find in the last 6 verses of Revelation where most manuscripts, well, anything based on the Textus Receptus says, I will not remove his part from the book of life. Actually, the great majority say from the tree of life. Well, not a whole lot of difference. If you're taken away from the tree of life, it sure looks like you're being written out of the book of life, right? But anyway, that's one of the discrepancies, and I want to show you some of them.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Okay. That's on Revelation 22:19.
Yeah.
Mine says, God shall take away his part from the book of life.
Yeah, so that's
what you're talking about.
So that's based on this Textus Receptus, which is going to be King James, New King James,
yeah,
and then some other foreign languages. And then people say, oh, this is terrible. The translators of this version left that out. Well, no, it's the manuscript that left it out. They were trying to be as faithful as they could to the manuscript. So here are some of the discrepancies between the majority text and the Textus Receptus, and they're trivial, but the Textus Receptus is not the majority text. So for instance, Matthew 26:26, he gave thanks for this rather than blessed it. Matthew 27:35, the majority leaves out that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet and so forth. And then Mark 6:33 reads they instead of the multitude. A whole bunch like this. None of them makes any difference. A lot of them are spelling variations, like Bethphage versus Bethphage, and acolt rather than decolt. Some lack the but, some lack rather. And then let me go down to the bottom of the page. So, you can look this up. Look up differences between the Receptus and the majority text. Revelation 22:19, the majority says, may God take away, and then the Receptus says, God shall take away. Not a whole lot of difference, but it's not identical. And then the majority reads tree of life rather than book of life. Well, I don't want to be taken out of the book of life or the tree of life. It pretty much means the same thing, but just to let you know that Okay, there's a few little discrepancies. And what you have to do is decide which one am I most comfortable with. There's not going to be any difference in doctrine between any manuscript and any of the manuscripts. But which one am I most comfortable with? Okay, come on, come on. Okay, here we go again. Y'all need to hire a new engineer. Okay, so the Textus Receptus is the one that's the basis of the King James and the New King James. I like the New King James. I like the way it reads, but I also refer to the manuscripts of the critical text. And then the next one is called the majority text. It's based on the available Greek manuscripts that have been compiled to this day. So in Erasmus's day, there were a lot of them that were not yet known, but they've been discovered later in libraries and monasteries and so forth. They've been compiled. So in this case, it's kind of like a majority vote. If 100 manuscripts say this and 50 manuscripts say that, we're going to go with the 100. The critical text that I'm going to get to in a few minutes generally is going to go not so much by the quantity, but by the age. And it's the matter of decision. So why do we have all these variant readings? I'm going to get back to the critical text in a few minutes. A lot of it was just probably sloppy penmanship. The New Testament was written all longhand in all capital letters. And so if you write down the word humais, meaning your, versus the word hemais, meaning ours, if somebody was a little sloppy with their penmanship, yeah, you could easily see how there'd be a mistake made there. And then sometimes people would throw in an extra letter, like rabbi in Greek is rho, alpha, beta, beta, iota. But then some of them throw in an extra epsilon in there, but it's pronounced the same and it means the same. Okay, so yes, it's variant readings, but it doesn't amount to even a hill of beans. So this is something that I have great respect for the people that do this. There's a discipline called textual criticism. It's not saying I'm criticizing the text. It's saying I'm going to exercise a critical eye when I examine the manuscripts. This is a discipline where scholars are trying to figure out which one of these is closest to, or maybe exactly, what was originally written. And I emphasize over and over and over, there's only 5% uncertainty. Okay, so if you read in your margin that other manuscripts say this, well, okay, don't use that one. So we don't know if individual churches in the first century had a complete New Testament. We do know that the church as a whole had all the books, and you could reconstruct the entire New Testament except for 11 verses. Then the codices, by the year 300, the codices were kind of locking things in to where, all right, this is what's going to be commonly accepted. There's also thousands of early translations into other languages, particularly Latin, and they all agree within a small part of 1%. So there are a number of scholars that have been comparing and compiling the available manuscripts. They put together the critical text, and it's referred as the Nestle Aland / United Bible Society, or usually just NU. So when you look in your Bible and there's a column and it says NU says whatever, it's the critical text. And this keeps changing. It's on its 28th edition. The most recent edition is from 1980 something. And it's not a major change from one to another. We discovered a new manuscript and collated it. And all those fragments I showed you earlier, okay, this says this, but there's a missing piece, and this says, oh, look, it fits right in the middle of there. So it's just an attempt to collate it, but it's no disrespect at all to the Word of God. It's a loving effort to put it all together. It's like the scribes of the Old Testament. They would give their lives rather than have anything happen to those books. So even if we compare what we consider the best and the worst manuscripts, there's never, well, there's one exception. Except for one place, there's never any question of doctrine involved. I'll show you what the doctrine is. Okay, so the critical text is the basis of most modern translations. And I'm not talking about the quality of the translation. I'm just saying the Greek text that underlies it. It's been continually revised for well over a century. You had guys like Bultmann and Metzger in the 1800s and then carrying on into the 1900s. And Nestle is one of the main families that's involved in this. So every time they discover a new manuscript or fragment, they don't just automatically throw out everything that's been there before, but they look to see, okay, how old is this? Is there other evidence that's supporting it? And maybe we need to make a note saying that, other manuscripts say whatever. But they're not trying to throw out the New Testament. Okay, as I said, there's only one place where there's any doctrine involved based on a variant reading. The three main variant readings in the whole New Testament, if you look at Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 20, some manuscripts don't contain that. Most manuscripts do. But if you say, well, I'm going to get rid of it because some manuscripts don't contain it, okay, what doctrines does it contain? It says believers will be able to cast out devils. Do you find that elsewhere? Yeah. It says they shall lay hands on the sick and they shall recover. Yeah. It says they shall speak with new tongues. Yeah. It says if they handle serpents, they'll be okay. Yeah, Paul handled a serpent. It also says if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. Well, that's the only place I see that. So I would recommend, unless you're absolutely sure, don't drink poison. Okay? That should be a good solution to that. If you're not sure, then look elsewhere. So like the woman caught in the act of adultery in John chapter 7, verse 53 through 8, verse 11, some manuscripts don't have that. So you say, oh no, I'm going to get rid of it. Well, is repentance, forgiveness, condemnation, non-condemnation found elsewhere? Of course, everywhere. So if you say, I don't know about that section, then don't use it. Use other ones. The same principles are found everywhere else throughout the New Testament. And then some manuscripts omit 1 John 5:7, which mentions the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. Anybody have a Bible handy?
Yeah.
1 John 5:7. Read that for us, please.
5:7. There are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. And these three are one.
Yeah. Not all manuscripts contain that. It is in the Textus Receptus. It's not in the majority in the critical text. Okay, that's terrible. So does that mean that we can't refer to the Father and Jesus, the Word of God, and the Holy Spirit? No, that's all throughout the New Testament. So I just don't think it's a big deal that we should argue and fight over it. Because if I want to tell you about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I'll go to the baptism of Jesus. Oh, yes, the Father spoke and said, this is my beloved Son, and Jesus is getting baptized, and the Holy Spirit is hovering like a dove. Oh, yeah, there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So every other variant reading is a trivial thing like a spelling variation or a reversal of word order or something like that. Okay, so let's look at the Old Testament. That was New Testament. New Testament, well, I'm completely confident in the New Testament, as have other Christians down through the ages been confident in the New Testament. By the time of the year 300, the Emperor Diocletian issued an order. He hated these Christians, Roman Emperor. He said, anybody found in possession of these books, these Christian books, will be killed. So the Christians had to make a decision. Okay, you're going to get rid of your collection of Mickey Mouse comic books? Sure. You're going to get rid of your collection of the Word of God? No. Kill me if you need to. So they knew by the year 187 which books were worth dying for that were accepted. But in the Old Testament, it talks about back from the very beginning of the world, and the way it's divided, it's the generations of this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. It indicates that each section from Adam on was compiled by either that person or someone familiar with him. So it's passed on orally or sometimes in writing. Writing had been discovered or had been developed before Moses. There have been ancient artifacts found where, oh yeah, look at that. Somebody wrote stuff before Moses. So we have the generations of the heaven and the earth. That's the creation account. And then Adam, Noah, and so forth. It's in a poetic format. Hebrew poetry. It's not the same as English poetry, but it's still Hebrew poetry. And people say, that's just poetry. Well, I'm going to quote you something I learned when I was 15 years old. Wanda da prilla with his short sword that the drota march hath perced to the rota and bather every vein in switch liquor which virtue engendered is the floor. That's the beginning of the Canterbury Tales. I remember it exactly word for word 53 years later because it's in a poetic format. Poetry makes it easier to get it right, not harder. And there are a number of cultures around the world where the people know the tribal history orally. And they have a tribal historian who narrates the tribal history. And boy, if he ever gets one syllable wrong, they're going to jump all over him because it's in a poetic format. So the fact that it's in a poetic format, I think, would strengthen rather than weaken the position of what it says in Genesis. And if you go with everybody from Adam onward, you find out it wasn't that long. So from the creation of Adam until about the year 1000, you had 5, 6, 7 generations. And then his life actually overlapped. He just missed Noah by a little bit, but his life overlapped Noah's father. And so I would presume Adam passed on the word to his descendants. And then Noah's father, I would presume, passed on the word to his son Noah, and he carried it through the flood. So he only needed 2 repetitions to get it to this side of the flood. And then after that, it wasn't very long before Abraham came along. His life actually began only just a few years after Noah, and his life overlapped Shem, Noah's son Shem. This was really surprising when I started putting together all these charts. What? Wait, he was still alive? Yeah. So this is according to the Masoretic text, which is the Old Testament that Jesus used. So the Old Testament is the Jewish Bible. They call it the Tanakh. And it's divided into the Torah, which is the books of Moses, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, and then the prophets, the Nevi'im, and the writings, which is the Ketuvim. There was not any one person that said, this belongs in the Bible. It was just accepted by consensus among the Jewish leaders, the Jewish Sanhedrin. And did you guys realize that the Sanhedrin, which went out of existence after Jesus' crucifixion, there was one more meeting in the year 70, and there has been no Sanhedrin up until 2018. They were reconstituted. They did DNA tests to find out who's legitimately has a claim to be a member of the priestly tribe. Not only Levites, but also descendants of Aaron. And the Hebrew name Cohen means priest. So if you know somebody named Cohen or Cohen, could be they have priestly blood, but they've done DNA testing to find out who's legitimately of the priestly line. And they've been doing grain sacrifices for about 3 years now. They haven't started up animal sacrifices because that would be a real political upheaval, but they're ready. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, the Sanhedrin decided, okay, this book, yes, we accept it. This book, we accept. No, this book, we don't accept. So they had certain rules. First, it had to agree with the Torah and the earlier scriptures. It also had to be written either by a recognized prophet or author of earlier scripture. Like Ezra wasn't a prophet, but he was a scribe. So he wrote some of the books of the Old Testament. It had to be written in Hebrew. The one exception they made was Daniel because there were parts of it written in Aramaic. And then it had to be written either in the nation of Judah or Israel. But then Daniel, he was a prophet. We're going to let him go. And if there was even one single error, it would be thrown out. So if you look at the book of Tobit, for instance, the Jewish people were well aware of this, and they threw it out because it has an angel lying about who he is. Angels are not going to lie about who they are. Demons might.
What book?
Tobit.
Oh.
It's about a young man, Tobit, his father, Tobiah, and he's looking for a wife for his son. And there's this woman that's been engaged to be married a bunch of times, and every time this demon Asmodeus will kill uh, her spouse on the wedding night. And so, the angel Raphael comes along and he tells him what to do, and they ask him, "Who are you?" And he makes up a story. So anyway, and this is the support the Catholic Church gets for a lot of their rituals, like burning various kinds of oils and so forth. Okay, so the Old Testament canon was canon is from the Greek word kanon, which is a measuring reed. These are the things that have stood up to measurement. So except for the book of Esther, the contents of the Jewish Bible, which is our Old Testament, were all settled by the time of Jesus. Jesus never, ever disagreed with the scribes and the Pharisees about what constituted Scripture. He just said, "You don't understand." And the uncertainty about the book of Esther was settled in the year 70. The Sanhedrin asked Rome, "Can we get together one more time?" So they met at a place called Jamnia. And Rome said, "Okay, you can." And they did say, "Yeah, Esther does belong." The reason they had rejected Esther before is it doesn't actually mention God.
It's the only book.
Right. But, God is all throughout it. So the extra books of the Old Testament, called the Apocrypha, the Catholic Church calls them deuterocanonical. They were well known in Jesus' time. They had been rejected by then, and they weren't officially added to the Catholic Bible for about 1600 years. There was a dispute in the 400s between two eminent scholars, Augustine and Jerome. Augustine said, "Yeah, we should include these." Jerome said, "I'm not going to translate that. You'll do that over my dead body." And literally they did. So the Apocrypha were not added until the Council of Trent in the 1600s. They're important to the Catholic Church because Second Maccabees is used to support the doctrine of purgatory, and then Tobit is used to do things like casting out demons with rituals and so forth. So the Christian chapter and verse divisions were added in 1227 AD. Actually, um, I don't remember the guy's name, but he added the chapter divisions, and then a Jewish rabbi did the Old Testament, and other Christians did the New Testament. But Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1227, he's the one. And you just picked up the whole thing, and you had to find the place. So when you read in the book of Hebrews where he says, "As it says in another place," well, he didn't have chapter and verses yet. Okay, so I want to unroll this, so I'm going to step away from the camera. This is a copy of the scroll of Isaiah. Have you all seen this before? Somebody hold an angle. This is the entire Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea. The whole book of Isaiah. All 66 chapters of Isaiah.
Wow.
And the reason it looks like it's burned is the replica, the people making the replica, they wanted to make it look as close as possible to what the original looked like. This was found in one of the caves at Qumran at the Dead Sea. Pull it a little more. So as you can see, it's the whole book.
Wow.
Now, if you compare this, anybody want to see it? It's not the original, they wouldn't have let me out of the country with it. But
You would be in jail.
oh yeah, the Israeli Antiquity Department would have put me under the jail. It would have buried me to be found in 1,000 years. Okay, so now that you did all of that nice stuff for me, here's what it looks like on camera. Would you mind rolling it up for me? Or somebody else could. Patricia looks like she wants to.
I'm so fancy that I'm be concerned that I would mess it up. That's why I put it here.
So, they sell these in Israel, and it's as close as they can to an exact replica of the Isaiah scroll.
Wow, what a blessing to have.
Oh, yeah, really.
Well,
Yeah.
it's in Hebrew, right? I will not
Well,
understand a word.
but regardless, it shows the astonishing accuracy of the Jewish scribes. When they were copying, they would die before they let anything happen to those manuscripts. And it wasn't just the book of Isaiah, it was all of the books of the Old Testament. So this one, we're fortunate. The Dead Sea to the east of Jerusalem a little bit. Of course, it's a desert region, but there's a bunch of caves there. And back in the 1940s, I believe about 1946, the story was that a Bedouin shepherd boy had his sheep and his goats, and one of the goats went into one of these little bitty caves. And so he tried to get it to come out, and it wouldn't. So he threw a rock in after it, and he heard some pottery break. He said, "Huh?" So he crawled in, and he found some of these pots. Well, his dad called the university in Jerusalem, and they sent out a team of archaeologists. Said, boy, they got excited. Previous to this, the oldest known Hebrew manuscript dated to about the year 980. It was called the Masoretic text. But then this dates to the time of Christ, so it's about 1,000 years older than the previous manuscript. And for instance, in the book of Isaiah, over 1,000 years of copying, 3 letters were changed.
Wow.
So they tried their best to do a good job copying these things. So these are some of the things that the scribes would do. They had regulations regarding what color ink would they write, what did they wear. They had a uniform that they had to wear. They couldn't write a single letter from memory. They had to actually look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it. And before they got finished, they would count the number of occurrences of each aleph, each beth, each gimel, each daled in this section. And when they got finished, they counted them over here to make sure they got the right number of each letter. So if they messed up one time, they generally would throw it away. Now, writing materials were not very common in those days, so there's a thought that maybe they would give some of them to the yeshiva, where the young boys were learning to read Hebrew. So the reason for the discrepancy of 3 letters is, okay, maybe somebody messed up and they gave that to the school. So the schools don't always get the best books, do they? So they would count the number of occurrences, they would count the middle verse and the letters of major sections of the text and the whole Old Testament. And let's see, Kathy, could I borrow your Bible for a second?
Yeah.
Thank you. You know what the middle verse of the Bible is?
Jesus, what?
Nope. Middle verse of the whole Bible.
That's a choice. Oh, Psalm 18,
It is
118. 118, I think.
You found it?
No, but is that is it, huh? No,
It's either
117.
Could be, you got it?
Praise the Lord, all you Gentiles, love him, all you people, for his mercy, for kindness, his great towards us.
No, that's not the
And the
middle verse.
truth of the Lord endures forever. Praise the Lord. That's another one.
That's not the middle verse. Well, it's a good one, good one. Okay, maybe.
I thought that was a middle chapter. That's what it is.
Or middle chapter, yes. Yeah, okay, anyway, the middle verse is it is better to trust in the Lord than put confidence in man.
Wow. Praise God. What an amazing.
So find that one. That's the
What
middle verse.
chapter?
I don't know, you're gonna have to look that up.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
somewhere right around 116, 117, 118, 119, somewhere right around there.
Oh, okay, around this. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, it's on Psalm 118. 8 and 8.
Read it for us,
It is
please.
better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in men.
Middle verse of the whole Bible.
Yeah.
Better to trust in the Lord than to
Psalm
put confidence in man.
118,
Yep.
8.
Okay, so then they had rules for how many letters wide and how many lines high each column could be. You could see that in the Isaiah scroll. They also had regulations for the exact number of space between letters and between sections of the text. You can see that in the Isaiah scroll. So, by the time of Jesus, the Old Testament was settled. Did Jesus believe it? Boy, did he! Over and over, he said, "It is written, it is written, it is written." he talked about, well, in Luke chapter 4, where the devil came to him, he didn't say, I'm the Son of God. He just said, it's written. He just used the scriptures the same as are available to us. And then in Matthew chapter 19, he referred to the creation of Adam and Eve as a literal historical event. Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39, he referred to the flood as a literal event. John chapter 5, there are scholars, so-called scholars, that say, well, there must have been 2 or 3 different authors of the Torah. There's the JEPD hypothesis. It says there was 4 authors. Jesus said Moses wrote it. Oh, I think that settles it for me. And then there are people that say, well, there was not just one Daniel, there was more than one Daniel. Matthew 24, Jesus referred to one man named Daniel. And then I'm going to get to this in a few minutes. Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, he was referring to the Old Testament law. He said, heaven and earth might pass away, but not one jot and not one tittle shall pass away. And then the tense of a verb. Matthew 22, verse 32. Can somebody read that for us? Matthew 22, 32. They were talking about, okay, this man got married and died and then left his wife to his brother. Okay. Somebody
Somebody else? Go ahead.
you can. Whoever's got it.
32, got it.
Matthew 22, 32.
32 is, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitudes heard this, they were astonished at his teaching.
So because of the fact that the verb was in the present tense rather than the past tense, I am, not I was, the God of Abraham. Oh, this is how we know we're resurrected. Because of the tense of a verb. And then the apostles and the other New Testament writers made reference to really nitpicky things. In Galatians 3:16, Paul points out that Genesis chapter 17, the promise was made to Abraham's seed, not to his seeds. Seed singular, which means, okay, God's got one seed. If you want to come to God, you come through him. You don't come on your own. That's a pretty important thing to draw from the fact that something's singular, not plural. And then 2 Peter said that nobody made this up. Holy men spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. There's over 300 times where the New Testament says something like that. Okay, so if we compare the Old Testament manuscripts, we don't have nearly as many Old Testament manuscripts as we do New Testaments, because they didn't have as many people around to write, and they were very meticulous, though. So there's only a few letters difference between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text dated 1,000 years later. And the Yemenite Torah, this is not just the book of Isaiah, but the whole Torah, the whole 5 books. In Yemen, there are a group of Jews that were copying it for 1,000 years, and they changed 9 letters in 1,000 years out of 304,805. The Septuagint, which was translated into Greek about 250 BC, agrees almost completely with the Masoretic text, although I'll point out some differences later. It's almost always having to do with the writing of numbers, and they never affect any doctrines. Old Testament manuscripts in other languages, Syriac and so forth, are in almost complete agreement with the Masoretic text as well. So this is one that I do have a little bit of problem with. In the Old Testament, it was written in Hebrew originally. It was in ancient Hebrew that didn't have vowels, but everybody understood what it was. So as they read it, yeah, they would say the correct thing. Later on, ancient Hebrew began to fall into disuse, and people weren't quite sure, so the scribes would put vowels in there to indicate, yeah, this is what it should say. And I think that introduced an error into the description of where the Garden of Eden was, which we'll get to later on. But when the Hebrew language began to fall into disuse, the leaders said, well, we need to translate this. Let's put it into Greek, which is a common language of the day. So Alexander the Great had made Greek the common language of his day. And, there's a lot of stuff that we do because Alexander the Great said it. Okay. So it was translated into Greek at Alexandria, Egypt. The Torah was. It's not really clear when the rest was, because they had all of the other books of the Old Testament, but the Torah was translated at Alexandria. And there are some conflicting stories about who did it, how it was done. One of the stories says the work was done by 70 translators, and this is where Septuagint came from. Septua means 70, and it's abbreviated LXX, which is a Roman numeral for 70. But then there's other legends that say, well, there was 72 of them, and they worked individually. Others said, no, there were 72, and they worked in pairs to produce either 36 or 72 identical copies. And, they would have a secretary writing. I don't remember what you called anyway, a secretary would be writing it for them. Well, however it was produced, the Septuagint was commonly used by the early church. So when you read your New Testament, you'll see a quotation from the Old Testament. Sometimes it's exactly from the Hebrew. Sometimes seems to be from the Septuagint. Sometimes it's neither. Well, these guys could read Hebrew and Greek, so, they could paraphrase it into the way that they wanted to also. The discrepancies in the Old Testament between one manuscript and another are very few and far between. There's a very small number of variant readings. Almost every one of them has to do with numbers. They almost never occur in other areas, so we think that probably the reason for this is different numbering systems. In English, we have a symbol for one, the little one, and then a 2 and 3 and 4 and all of that. Okay. They use the letters of their alphabet. So in Greek, alpha represented 1, beta represented 2, gamma represented 3. Hebrew is aleph, bet, gimel representing 1, 2, 3. And so any word had a numerical value. And so occasionally you'd have some numerical differences, because originally we had it didn't have vowel points, and then we added vowel points. So the scribes translating into Aramaic, Greek, and other later Hebrew had to use their judgment about what vowels to insert. So the Masoretic text is going to give you certain ages for the guys before Noah's flood, and then the Septuagint in some of them is off by exactly 100 years. Well, because the Septuagint guys were having to decide which value do we take here. There was no vowel point, so let's see, what should we put here? And the numbering systems in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic, like in the book of Daniel, they're a little obscure, so they may have differed somewhat from each other and possibly from Greek. But in no case is there any question of doctrine. So I'm a young earth creationist. I believe you read your Bible based on the Masoretic text, and you're going to come up with an age of the earth of less than 7,000 years, right around 6. Well, if you take the Septuagint, you're going to add maybe 1,000 years. It's still not millions. Okay, so it's no major doctrine involved. Let's see, what time is it? 5:05. 5:05. Okay, so I'm going to introduce this, then I'll start off with this next time. Okay, do you remember Jesus? Oh yeah, he created everything, right? He said, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." Well, the law, that's the most important part of the Bible to the Jewish people, the books of Moses, the Torah. Jesus said, we're not going to have one dot. A yod was the smallest letter, and a tittle was the smallest vowel point of a letter. Jesus said, okay, at least for the law, not one jot or one tittle is going to pass away. This saying would be meaningless in any other language except Hebrew. Greek doesn't have jots and tittles. So I think Jesus was saying, I'm going to guarantee you the preservation of the Torah in the Hebrew language. So as I said, the Septuagint in the Greek language, I have some problems with it, and I'll point out some of those next time. None of them are really major, but I think when possible, we should stick to the Masoretic text for the Old Testament. And that's probably a good place to stop for now. And next week we will continue. I'm thinking we probably have 3 more times. Okay. All righty then. So who's online? Gino D'Antonio said, wow. Amen. Unbelievable. Okay. Well, bye, Gino, and whoever else is out there in Radio Land. End live video. Yes, and.